Good evening, everyone, and good morning to those of you joining us from India. I am Lata Patil, and on behalf of Indians for Collective Action, a warm welcome to all of you. And thank you for joining us during these very unsettling times. We will begin soon, but now please join me in a moment of silence in memory of the tragic loss of lives we witnessed recently in this country, which has unleashed a torrent of anguish, pain, and grief all across the US and has sparked a global movement addressing inequity, injustice, and tyranny wherever they occur. I'm going to start it right now, just for a minute. Okay, start. Really appreciate that. Today's discussion is focused on the gender crisis the pandemic is causing, a topic that's of vital interest to all of us. This meeting is the third session of the four-part Change Agent series of conversations that ICA is facilitating as a continuation of our first meeting last year in October, focusing on the same four complex issues that are important to us and our members at ICA. We have already finished two of them. One was on health and the other was on environment. And in a couple of weeks, we'll be doing the last one on education. We are so glad that some of you who were there at that session last year have joined us again today to continue that conversation. That first discussion last year was about understanding the nature of purposeful philanthropy in the community towards social causes and social advancement, and how ICA can support and facilitate individual efforts, whether it was supporting causes in India or right here in the communities we live in. As you all know, that was a different world then. In a short few months, COVID-19 has brought the world to a halt, forcing us to face a new sense of urgency to be actively taking action to support a range of social causes that are important to our community. The question at the center of these discussions have always been, what can we do as individuals to make a difference in people's lives? Our immediate action was to raise funds, as that was the most urgent need as we saw it. And I'm happy to tell you that with the help of our members and community here, ICA was able to raise close to $1 million in the last couple of months and has supported 65 different organizations right here in the Valley, as well as several in India. But going beyond finances, we have to begin initiating conversations with social change leaders who are tackling some real pressing issues and develop an ongoing dialogue in understanding the challenges they face, share some reflections on the crisis and possible solutions, like the one we are hosting today. As people everywhere are coming to grips with the pandemic and trying for the best solutions, it is becoming abundantly clear that this global pandemic does not serve as a great equalizer and is a devastating lesson on growing inequalities everywhere. Women and girls are being disproportionately affected by the COVID-19 crisis, and experts warn us that globally, women and girls will bear the brunt of economic downturns, which can impact their schooling, their health, including mental health, and opportunities. I think you'll be shocked to hear this news. In April, the Malala Fund projected that the pandemic will terminate or seriously delay secondary schooling for 10 million girls, most of whom, once they quit school, hardly are ever able to return. Globally, women perform most of the world's unpaid labor. They earn less, they save less, they're more likely to be in precarious jobs with little security or protections. And if they work in the informal sector, with no protection at all. Like we are seeing right here in Silicon Valley, most who face devastating long-term impacts from the economic fallout are mostly women in low-income jobs and women of color. You will hear more of that from our moderator and our audience. There are so many issues to consider. From the worldwide surge in domestic violence to trafficking of young girls, the failure of our healthcare systems to the challenges of working women struggling to balance work and family, to the fact that in most countries, the primary caregivers nurses, minimum and low-wage workers, or women. The gendered reality of the pandemic is that COVID-19 is deepening the fault lines in our social and economic systems, entrenching the inequalities that already exist. So we believe that it's imperative that we all take a look at this global crisis through a gendered lens to create awareness and address these most pressing challenges to women everywhere and develop innovative solutions. Today, we are fortunate to have with us someone who's uniquely qualified to be able to relate to these key issues and comes to us with exceptional qualifications. In the interest of time, I'll be brief in my introductions, but hope she will go into some detail during her presentation and also maybe during the Q&A session. Now, I'm pleased to welcome Padma Shri Reema Nanavati, CEO at SEWA. That is SEWA, Self-Employed Women's Association in Ahmedabad, India. And with almost 2 million members worldwide, is the largest organization of informal workers in the world and the largest nonprofit in India. She is a distinguished social thinker, researcher known for her expertise in areas such as gender economics, development economics, social infrastructure, human rights, and women's studies. SEWA's main goals are to organize women workers for full employment and self-reliance. And for over 30 years, Reema Bain, as she is fondly called, has been working tirelessly on women's economic empowerment, green energy, children's rights, and has led millions of SEWA members, empowering them and lifting them out of poverty. She has received one of India's highest honors given to civilians, that is the Padma Shri Award in 2013. Today, we'll hear stories about how almost 2 million women have been empowered, making it the single largest union of informal sector of women workers, and learn their challenges and solutions. She's currently a member of the Advisory Council on Gender at the World Bank. She was also a member of the International Labour Organization's High-Level Global Commission on the Future Work. I'm especially pleased to reconnect with Reema Bain today, as I had the privilege of working with a group of SEWA women, both in 2018 and 2019, and saw firsthand the kind of support SEWA is providing women at the grassroots level, an experience that I and my colleagues will not forget soon. Reema Bain, welcome. Pratima Pandey, namaste, and good morning to you. Now our moderator, Pratima Pandey, is the Director of Office of Women's Policy in Santa Clara County, California. As part of the county executive, her office works to bring gender lens to policy decision-making, building a pipeline to leadership, and creating equity in governance. Prior to that, Pratima was the Managing Attorney and Regional Counsel for Immigration at Bay Area Legal Aid. Additionally, she is faculty for Practicing Law Institute in San Francisco, training on issues relating to housing rights for immigrants, representation of domestic violence survivors in family courts. Pratima, welcome. Now, just a few housekeeping items before they start. Our speaker will have about 20 to 25 minutes for her presentation that Pratima will be initiating soon. And then we will move on to the Q&A feature for another 30 minutes. We will try and address as many as possible. Because of the high number of participants today, please limit your comments to 3 minutes only. I'm sorry for that, but we will certainly do a deep dive another time, hopefully soon. Do send your questions or comments to the chat section, adding your first and last names, plus any organizations you're part of, and your email too. And also let us know where you're joining us from. Are you in India or right here in Silicon Valley? If you want to speak, please click on the hand sign on your Zoom screen. And also keep your audio button on mute when not speaking. Please know that this session is being recorded. Thank you. Now, Pratima and Reema Bain, welcome again.
Thank you, Lataji, and good evening and good morning. First and foremost, Reema Bain, it is an honor. I could never have imagined in my life ever to have the honor of sharing a screen, not a stage, but a screen, with somebody who has done so much for the women's movement, and someone who has achieved these heights by ensuring that every single person who is represented through the work of Seva is the person who lives in the grassroots in our communities. At the Office of Women's Policy, we focus on four broad areas, but empowerment of women, we know, is not a single stop shop. We know that the moving pieces in the lives of women are impacted in a different, disproportionate way, especially when we are in a global crisis like this. The International Center for Growth Studies in London reported that research from the SARS and the Ebola crises demonstrated that women and men experienced the pandemic outcomes during the pandemic and during recovery differently. Fatality rates are not the only way to measure impacts on men and women. Additionally, social norms, cultural norms, and gendered roles have played a huge role in ensuring that women and men are going to become, in a different way, going to become victims of these pandemics differently. Today, we have the opportunity to learn from somebody who built from the ground up the most important part of what is necessary for one half of the world's population, for women and girls. What can we do today to learn from Rima Ben how the work that can be done from the ground up, not trickle down, how the work that can be done from the ground up makes a significant and lasting change. Lataji talked about the statistics on how unemployment and the health crises have now combined to create a perfect storm for all the work that has been done in promoting gender equity. And all of you today are part of a conversation that we hope that we can generate ideas on creating outcomes and pipelines for all of us to work when recovery starts to happen. In April, the United Nations had put out a report that said that the most important part of the pandemic recovery post-COVID-19 is to ensure that women and girls are kept at the center of any recovery plans. What we hope to do today, as we learn from Rima Ben, is to generate a conversation about how we as expats living here in the United States, many of us also working with social causes here on the ground in our own communities, and people like Rima Ji who have demonstrated the tenacity needed to build a movement and to sustain it. That combination is what we hope that we can learn from. I'm going to now turn it over to Rima Ben to make her remarks, and then we'll go after her remarks to the Q&A. With that, Rima Ben, namaste and welcome.
Namaste, and a very good evening to the distinguished and honorable members of ICA. It's truly been a special privilege to be talking to some of the stalwarts in their respective fields, be it in IT, be it in law, be it in education, be it in gender studies, gender and law, medicine. So I think it's truly an honor and a privilege. I will be bringing to you today the voices of the 1.9 million women that I represent today. And I think we're all living in a very unusual and turbulent times, as you know, both Lataji as well as Pratima Ben had said. And the COVID-19 pandemic and the resulting lockdown is directly and in a very destructive way affecting the incomes of the informal sector women workers that I am talking about. These are the women who do not have any employer-employee relationship. These are all women who are self-employed, so who are either working on the streets as vendors and hawkers, who are working as manual workers, they are construction workers, agriculture workers, salt miners, waste collectors, forest workers, or these are home-based workers, women working from home as, you know, garment workers, kite makers, BD, the Indian cigar rollers, and or making small miscellaneous items from their homes. And for these women, you know, the daily work only is their means of survival. And therefore, you can imagine how destructive the lockdown and the social distancing has been. An internal survey that was conducted by SEVA post-lockdown showed that over 40% of the informal sector women and their households have completely lost all their livelihoods. Over 43% have been forced to reduce their food intake. And women are, as we all know, in India, are the last to have food and therefore have the least food available. 73% will need food grain support to sustain themselves if the current situation extends further, including the migrant workers who are now returning back to their villages and to their hometowns. The sad part is that the children who had started going to schools have now been faced a setback, at least for a year, and in many cases dropout, especially amongst the daughters, will be very high. Almost in 25% households, we have seen that women and girls face abuse and violence from men. Whatever assets that they have in terms of land or working capital or tools and equipments are lost or have become redundant. Due to quarantine in the urban areas, women will not be able to maintain the hygiene, sanitation, and social distance, and therefore are more likely and prone to infections, not just COVID-19, but even other infections as well. The stress on the women both to find meaningful work and income, as well as to maintain food security, has been tremendous and is compounding as days and months go by. However, I want to also not just paint a very sad picture as we all have been reading and experiencing, but I want to share with you that these grassroots women have really shown their resilience, and I would like to say that they are not a liability, but they need to be seen as someone who will help in building the economy of the nation. They are the human capital or the social capital. Let me share with you the story or the experience of one of our grassroots members, Shanta Ben. She's a waste collector herself, and she's a waste collector herself, and you know, her story will really make you understand when I say that they are the human capital or social capital. In her words, let me say that, you know, when I was talking to Savita Ben, a waste collector, she said that when the entire world decided to go under a complete lockdown by staying inside the confines of their homes, I stepped out of mine so that I could serve in a hospital treating corona patients. The intent behind her action was very simple. She did not wish to spread her hands in front of others begging for food and money. She is one of our grassroots leaders and a member of SEVA for 25 years. And she narrated that this COVID-19 pandemic has brought miseries of the magnitude that we had never even imagined or have witnessed before. I feel like somebody has collectively pinched all the daily wage earners and snatched away everything from us. This is worse than the riots. In case of a riot, we can at least migrate to other places and resume work. But this disease expects us to sit at home. We daily wage earners absolutely cannot afford that. And this is not the story of just Shanta Ben alone or Savita Ben alone, but this is the story of thousands of waste collectors, street vendors, home-based workers. But let me tell you, Shantaben wanted to live a life of dignity and self-respect and did not really want to feel vulnerable. And so she started approaching the contractor with whom she was selling her waste. And he said that he cannot find her any work to sell her waste or the scrap material. But you know, if she was willing to step out of her home and go and work in a hospital where the COVID-19 patients were treated, and Shantaben just grabbed that opportunity, and she, you know, she had to work as a plumber. She had never done that work before, but she said, I learned on the job because, you know, that was my need. I wanted to earn and live a life of dignity. And today she's being the most respected plumber in that civil hospital where, you know, there are 2,000 beds and all COVID patients are being treated there. She fearlessly goes there every morning from 7 a.m. and works till 8 p.m. She says that she was abused. She was, you know, people, her neighbors complained to the police. Whenever she would pass the streets, the neighbors would throw water on her so that they felt that they were cleaning up the streets, well, because she was working in a COVID hospital. But she fearlessly continued doing all that. Not just, you know, taking care of her family, but she said that, you know, she does not want anybody to sleep hungry till she is around, and therefore she's helping 6,000 other waste collector sisters like her, making sure that, you know, they get the ration from the public distribution system. They get all the entitlements that the government relief has set. And the last thing she narrated to me was so moving. She said that every day when she was passing by outside the gates of the civil hospital where she was working as a plumber, she saw that there was a cobbler who was sitting, and but he was not getting any work whatsoever. So she just asked him that, why do you come and sit here every day and, you know, exposing yourself? And he said that he just doesn't have any food to feed his family, and therefore he, in the hope that at least he will have 1 or 2 pairs of shoes to repair, that he comes here every day. She just pulled out her meager savings of 3,000 rupees from the Seva Bank, and next day she brought a ration kit for not just him, but there were 6 other cobblers, like families like him. And that's what we call them as the human capital of our country. You know, what they, the sisters like Shanta Ben, Kapila Ben, Jashi Ben, Bali Ben, what they show is that poor do not want charity, or they do not want relief. I think what they want is an enabling environment, an opportunity that will help them earn a life and live a life of dignity and self-respect. At Seva, what we have learned from our members is that work is a healer. They need work to rebuild their lives with dignity and self-respect. It provides them a sense of security, and therefore they are able to fight with their very many vulnerabilities and also the social issues. It reduces the anxiety, the stress, the trauma, and the tension that this pandemic and the lockdown has brought into their lives. Let me also give you some how this kind of adversity also brings out, you know, some of the opportunities. We had vegetable vendors as our members, and with the lockdown came, you know, a complete standstill into their work. But we approached the municipal authorities, and we were able to get the electric rickshaws. But the condition was that these vendors will have to go into the red zones, into the containment areas, and sell and provide vegetables to the households in those areas. Like what we heard from Shanta Ben's story, they could not afford to sit at home because they had to earn something, and these vendors agreed to go into the red zones and the containment areas to sell vegetables using the electric rickshaws that the municipal corporation was providing. We, on the other hand, in the villages had the vegetable growers, and we thought that how if we linked the vegetable growers and the vendors, and that has now become a full-fledged enterprise in this last 4 months. So today we have close to 600 vegetable vendors who now no longer sit on the streets and sell vegetables, but have these electric rickshaws. They do door-to-door delivery in the homes, not just now in the red zone or the containment areas, but in the other suburbs of the city of Ahmedabad. And we have close to 200 vegetable growers who now on a daily basis supply fresh vegetables from their farms to these vendors. So we now have built a whole supply chain, and now trying to build our own digital platform so that the customers can place online orders, and we are trying to have, minimum contact supply of vegetables. Likewise, we had landless agriculture laborers, we had waste collectors whom we had trained into making bakery items and confectionery items, and had never even dreamt that a lockdown could really give such a boost to the new acquired skills. The women started making bread, biscuits, and snacks during the lockdown, and that was in such big demand that today these women now sell almost 50,000 rupees worth of bread and snacks and biscuits on a daily basis. And 150 women now have full-fledged livelihood opportunity. Likewise, I think we were all planning and on a very slow pace trying to bring digital technology into the organization. As we all know that in a country like India, smartphones are, with access to smartphones for the poor women is still a far cry. But I think, with the lockdown, how do you continue communication with your members? And so, today we are a digital organization. Our grassroots leaders all have taken loans from Seva Bank, gotten iPads or smartphones, and they enroll members, they renew membership, they make sure that, the members have access to the government relief programs, the entitlements, whether the amount has been deposited in their bank accounts or not. They all now use Zoom and Google Meet and Microsoft Teams, and I am catching up, but they are much faster than I am. They use different applications like WhatsApp and Kaizala and everything for sharing of their messages, sharing the educational material on COVID-19 precautions. They all do online virtual trainings now. We have webinars. So this is an opportunity that had there not been a COVID-19 pandemic, God forbid, we don't want it to continue longer, or another virus comes and creates a larger pandemic or a more stronger pandemic. But every adversity, what we have learned so far from the series of disasters, that it always, one has to look for opportunities as well for development, because what has happened. But I think what I would really like to share also with you all is that one has to also therefore work on resilience building. How do you build the resilience? How do you, strengthen the very small and tiny enterprises of these informal sector women workers? And therefore, I think till the women do not get sustained adequate income, till they are able to rebuild their lives and communities, that is what is of utmost importance. And therefore, there is a need for a livelihood recovery fund, which will not only help them rebuild their livelihoods, but also helps in building resilience of their tiny and micro enterprises, or it will allow those enterprises to scale up. And therefore, I think what we all have also experienced and learned is that the future of work, when everybody was talking about future, has now suddenly become a reality. One has to therefore fast track. And what is going to be the reality or the future of work of these informal sector workers, the migrant workers who have all come back? I was talking to some of our members whose husbands or some of the members whose families had migrated and who have now come back in Bihar, in Orissa, in Rajasthan. And nobody wants to now go back. The kind of suffering, the kind of trauma that they have gone through in returning back to their villages. So they all want to work on Manrega in this heat, in this scorching heat, just doing nothing but digging earth, but nobody wants to leave their homes and villages now. So I think that's going to be a big challenge that for Seva as well as for the government, that how do you really generate meaningful livelihood opportunities for this, millions and millions of migrant workers. The only sad part is that with the men returning back to the villages, the women are pushed out from agriculture, labor work, from Manrega as well. And therefore, I think women are under a lot of stress. On the one hand, they wanted the families to be back in the villages all together. But on the other hand, how do they find work? And that's what is Seva's new challenge and the next challenge. I hope I have taken my full 20 minutes and I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rima Ben. This is incredibly useful. Here are all my chicken scratch notes. I do want to focus on something that you brought up in the middle of your talk. You talked about opportunities during adversity. It should not take a pandemic for us to see what gaps there are and how certain communities are more vulnerable than others. Despite all of that, the examples that you shared with us demonstrate that we can find ways to build capacity. But my biggest challenge is when we build capacity, how do we do it in a way that's sustainable? One. Two, when it is built, the capacity needs to belong to those for who this is the most beneficial, right? And so to your point with the men returning in the villages, first and foremost, the stress for women, as well as the opportunities. If we're talking about someone who was able to transform from a waste collector to a plumber, and that reminded me of a story that I shared with you, Rima Ben. Many, many years ago, when I was still a law student in India, I worked with Mahila Samakya in the villages in UP, and I learned about how the Sakhins, which is a collective of local women working in the village, learned to repair hand pumps in order to ensure that their communities and villages don't go thirsty without water. Because guess who was walking for 4 hours to collect water because the hand pump wasn't repaired? It was the women. And to me, stories that you just narrated are demonstrative of two things. One, that our community is able to thrive and survive despite the adversities. But two, more importantly, when we empower a woman with skills, with opportunities, and with a way to transform her livelihood in this pandemic, then we actually benefit the entire community. And to us, as we think about how we will play a role in this pandemic, I would love to hear from you 2 or 3 ideas on building solutions that can be sustainable, that will allow women to not only, as you said, right now find different opportunities, but also be able to scale it up so that they can sustainably generate outcomes that will stay with them, right? If we think about the 600 e-rickshaws that the vegetable vendors are able to use now because of the work that Seva's been able to do, what can we do to ensure that those e-rickshaws will remain with the women, will remain with these vendors, right? So that they can actually continue to grow and scale what they've been able to build. I know it's a very long question, but to me, the most important piece of what we are discussing is ensuring that we start to think broadly on not just these band-aid solutions, which communities like ours are very good at quickly finding, because as you said, they would rather find a way to earn an honest day's wages than be dependent on someone else. But now it is on us collectively to ensure that they can sustain that and grow that. So I would love to hear some thoughts. And for everybody, feel free to share your questions for Rima Ben in the chat box. Lataji is going to help me moderate. So please, thank you.
Sure. So I think you had two big questions that you said. One was that what are the 2 or 3 solutions that I think would help these women who have looked at, immediate low-hanging opportunities, but how do they scale them up? And the second is that how do you build capacities which are sustainable on a longer term? And I think between the two is your third question, which is that the assets that the women acquired in terms of electric rickshaws, how do we ensure that they continue, owning those assets, and you don't find after 2 years that either those assets were mortgaged or, they lost their assets completely. Very good questions, I think, and you will make me also start working and thinking on those lines at Seva as well. But I think the 2 or 3 solutions that I was talking about, and one is building resilience. With every small shock, not just a large pandemic like this, but small sickness in the family, or not being able to find work for 3 days also, it pushes them back into that vicious circle of indebtedness, and then it becomes very difficult for those informal sector workers to come. It takes a long time for them to come out of that vicious circle. It then keeps compounding and pushes them back to bonded labor kind of activities as well, because in order to pay back the money that they borrowed either from the neighbors or from the money lenders or from the relatives, then they now go back to the traders, or they go back to the sahucars in their villages, and therefore that whole vicious cycle starts, which then pushes them back into that trap of bonded labor situation. And therefore, I think what is needed is a blended pool of finance, which these informal sectors can very easily have access to. And when I say a blended pool of finance, unless and until you are a small and a medium enterprise, you cannot access capital from the market. While, these are tiny, tiny enterprises or entrepreneurs who need very quickly, not a large access to fund, but they need a few thousand rupees, 5,000 rupees, 3,000 rupees, 10,000 rupees. There's no bank which will be willing to lend to them this amount. There will be no investor or an angel investor or a God investor, I would say, who would be willing to invest in these kind of enterprises. So you need a blended pool of finance, which is 30% grant, 30% equity, and 40% debt, and with a longer term moratorium, so that they are able to stabilize, not just grab and as you said, a band-aid kind of a thing, but they are able to stabilize their enterprise and then start repaying back. There's no poor woman who would not repay back. Let me tell you that even during this pandemic lockdown, our repayment rate was 98%. So women would just call you, they would call our grassroots leaders that, I have money, can I come and repay my loan installment? I have money available, can I come and, deposit my savings? So that's the kind of financial discipline that they have, because they know the value of the capital that they have. They know that this capital is not easy to avail. So I think that is one thing which is very much needed, a blended pool of finance. And that is what SEVA is working on right now with the public sector banks, with the private sector banks, with a lot of the foundations, that how do you create an alternative investment fund for these kind of nano and tiny and micro entrepreneurs and enterprises. I think unless and until, to answer your second question, that how you build their capacity, we all saw from Shanta Ben's case experience that she doesn't need a months-long training to become a plumber. It was her dire necessity that pushed her to acquire that skill on the job, and she started mastering it. So I think what we need to therefore is organizing. There is no donor who would support for organizing, and unless and until you are organizing, you can't build your collective strength which will help you sustain. For an individual poor informal sector woman, it is next to impossible to sustain her newly acquired skill, or the newly acquired opportunity, unless and until you organize into a cooperative or a collective or a federation. It immediately builds her confidence. It gives her that collective strength that, oh, I'm not alone, but there are hundreds like me. If they have been able to overcome, I too will be able to do that. And so I think that's the second major solution that one has to. And the third is asset creation. That's another way of fighting poverty. So organizing come together with asset creation are the surest way to fight poverty. I hope I have tried to.
Yes, you have. And you know what? I think of Shanta Ben as your primary example of what happens when you have blended pool of finances, because that woman was responsible for feeding the cobblers and 6 others. And who knows what that did to those families and those cobblers. I'm reminded of what's happening here in the county of Santa Clara with the rent eviction moratorium, and your example of repayment and how repayment needs to be delayed. The rent eviction moratorium has built in a process for repayment so that the landlords understand that we as a community need to invest in preventing homelessness during the pandemic, especially for those who suffer job losses that may result in homelessness. And so the repayment of the eviction of the rent has been phased out in 6-month and 12-month periods. And that is an example of what has happened locally right here on the ground in the county of Santa Clara. And I feel that we can build on those examples. But I vote for Shanta Ben for the next treasurer for your finance pool. I'm just saying. So I have other questions, and I'm going to ask you that. So can we identify and develop strategies for post-pandemic response in resource-poor communities? And related to that is a question that comes from your comment about the fact that men return to the village and they will displace women from roles and the work that women have been doing. How can we think about a permanent realignment, and how do we shift our focus to providing better livelihood support and opportunities in those more remote and rural areas? So it's really a combination, right? What is it that we can do to help with that?
So what was the first question?
So the first question was about identifying and developing strategies for post-pandemic response in resource-poor communities. And related to that was the example you gave of the men who are coming back from being migrant laborers in urban communities, who may end up displacing women from the jobs they were doing in the rural communities. And what do we do to make sure that there are investments that we can make in these communities?
Sure, I think as far as the strategies are concerned, what are the reality is that, you know, you all may be fully aware or even more informed than I would be, because you all have access to all kind of news channels and means of getting information. But the migrants have just returned back to their villages. It's only 2 weeks that they have been able to return back to their villages. And with the unlocking, I think the industry is trying to, you know, bring them back to the cities so that their work can resume. Because a lot of industries want to reopen, but there are no workers who could come and do the work. So the situation is very fluid right now. And also, you know, a lot of the families lost their near and dear ones in the process of transition from the cities to the villages. And so therefore, I think what the strategy has to be immediately is to ensure that, you know, at least for the next 2 or 3 months, each and every household gets, you know, access to the entitlements that the government is offering, because that will help them tide over the immediate, you know, loss of work, hunger, the loss of family members. So that's one thing. And then one will have to look at what are the long-term social protection measures that need to be in place. What kind of a, and I think before I come to what kind of a healthcare system, I think another big question, and I don't really know if the government is also prepared for it, is that now the COVID-19 infections in the rural areas are increasing because of these workers returning back. And it's the healthcare system or the health infrastructure in the rural areas is minimal. And therefore, are we as a country prepared to address the needs that will emerge if the infection is not contained? And let me tell you, I'm so proud of our rural community. It's the villagers themselves who are working out the strategy. They don't need any consultants. They don't need any experts to work out their own strategy. You know, the villagers be it in Orissa, be it in Bihar, be it in Rajasthan, be it in Kashmir, or be it in Assam or in Gujarat, I talked to all of them, and the village panchayats have really done exemplary work in terms of ensuring that, you know, every returning migrant stays on a 14-day quarantine before he or she enters the village and returns back to their home. Who will have such self-discipline? Will we be willing to have that kind of a 14-day quarantine when you have had so much of hardship returning back that you would be dying to rush into your home? But each and every household, each and every worker returning back has shown that discipline. We need to really salute and respect the kind of, you know, resilience they have shown. There were no riots. Everybody respected what the villagers and what the panchayats had decided. Second is that, you know, even if somebody returns to the household or a relative comes without being in quarantine, the villagers have together decided a fine of anywhere ranging from 20,000 rupees to 200,000 rupees, depending on which state you are. And that's the kind of a discipline. Nobody will go out from the village. Nobody will come in the village. If you wanted your basic necessities, they have identified teams of young men in the villages who take turns on a daily basis. They collect the requirements of every household. They go bring it to the village, and then it's distributed to the households. Perfectly working mechanism. I don't think they need any strategy. And the biggest lesson that we are learning in terms of solution is that, you know, the community knows when something is their dire need or an issue, And if you involve the community, they know how to work out the solutions, and these solutions will sustain for long. So I think to answer the question also, Pratima ji, to what you asked, how will we sustain the capacities? It's the community which will sustain. You know, the capacity that really help them earn better incomes, which really help them feel secured their livelihood, those capacities at whatever cost, but they will sustain. I have full faith and confidence in those women. To address the second question, that now with the men returning and the women have to realign, definitely the women have to realign, and therefore one has to find what will be the new means of and opportunities of generating livelihoods. So that's another big area that one has to work. Right now, what we are advocating to the government is that they increase the types of work that could be undertaken under Manrega, so that women could also be accommodated, and also the number of days of work under Manrega. So, and the number of household members. So that's what we are trying to work on. One good thing that the government has really accepted is that now they are giving ration for per household member. Earlier it was only per household, but now it's per household member. So I think we will continue advocating with the governments, both at the state and at the national levels. But I think another few weeks and we will know very clearly what could be the alternative livelihood opportunities for the women, so that they don't have to go and work out, but also can work from home.
Useful, Rima Ben. This is really, really informative for all of us. And I just want to clarify, when I am a facilitator, I'm also a jargon watcher. So those of you who may not know what Manrega is, it's the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. Yes, it's a mouthful, but it is an important economic self-sufficiency measure in rural India. And it is it's heartening to know, Rima Ben, that there's a way to connect this work to the Manrega opportunities. And I think that in terms of policy, because that's the background I have, it's a very important policy to be developed. So I want to switch gears a little bit to a couple of other questions. There is a question, and this, I think Lata ji in her opening remarks also talked about the domestic violence and the increase in domestic violence that's been reported. And the question is, what is being done to stop the increase in domestic violence during the pandemic?
Yes, I think unfortunately nobody had expected that, one of the what you call fallout of a lockdown could be increased violence that women will have to really experience. And I think several reasons for it, that men suddenly lost all their work, lost the income. They had also to suffer a lot of humiliation because of the lockdown, the curfew that was imposed. Men just could not even go out and sit on the streets, or they couldn't go out and sit in the common space in the villages. The police would beat them up, and that was very humiliating for the men as well. There was tremendous anxiety that when will the work start, whether they'll be able to find the work or not. Men who were living in the cities and who were forced to come back, that was another humiliation that they were suffering. And for them to sit at home in just a small little home that they have, doing nothing. And last, I hate to say, but men had all kind of addictions. So, tobacco, cigars, drinking, gambling, and they just could not do that. There was no money for it. And even if, those things were available at night in the darkness, but how would they have access to it if there was no money? And all that frustration was brought out on women. And I think we had to really work very hard during the lockdown on this. That resulted into a lot of mental health issues, not only for women, but also for the men and also for the children, because, suddenly everything came to a grinding halt for children. No schools, they could not go out of their homes, they can't play, they cannot go to the neighbor's house. What will a young child do, 24 hours sitting inside the home? They could not go out to collect fodder for the cattle, fetching water. And so I was talking to some of the members, and one of them said that, you only had 2 hours in the morning where you could either go and fetch water, or you could either go and fetch fodder for the cattle, or you would cook for the family and get. So, she was completely torn. And I think we had to therefore immediately start working on counseling and on mental health related training for our leaders as well, because when you talk to the women, how do you talk to them? How you don't really flare up things, but she at least feels that she's able to share, and sharing also helps you at least 50% feel relieved that I have somebody with whom I can go and share. So that was the first thing we did, that how can she share, but also it was difficult because everybody was in the home. She could not talk on the phone in front of her father-in-law or in front of her husband. So we had to call her at 4 a.m. in the morning when she was going to the toilet, or we had to talk to her at 1 a.m. when everybody was going to sleep. So those were the kinds of adjustments that we also had to make, that at 4 a.m. or at 1 a.m. you are talking about what is it that she's going through, and then how do you work out your mental health or your counseling sessions. So that's how you addressed. And therefore, as I was saying when I first spoke, that work is a healer. We had to immediately start providing work to the households. So we trained women and men and children into making masks, so that they could start making masks and selling in the villages, selling to the local government offices, and that gave them at least some income in their hands, so that they were feeling some security. Some anxiety was coming down. Women started making. India wants to be a plastic-free nation, so we encouraged households to make paper bags, envelopes, notebooks and everything. So that brought income. Women started making dry snacks and selling, and we would provide with the raw material and collect the finished products. So that's how we address the whole issue of domestic violence.
Thank you, Rima Ben. As someone who's worked in the field of gender-based violence prevention for 20 years, I will say that while there is no excuse for domestic violence, and we're in a pandemic and we're all sheltered in place, but when the place that you shelter in is the cause for your fear, then that is the deepest anxiety builder, and it's a cause for safety for those individuals, right? We all are supposed to be safe in our homes. For those of you in the county of Santa Clara, I will encourage you to look up Safe Chat SV, our Office of Gender-Based Violence Prevention, which came out of the Office of Women's Policy, has funded Safe Chat SV. To Rima Ben's point, it's not safe for survivors to access services at this point in time because they're home with the abusers, they're home with their children. And so Safe Chat SV allows for a safe way, as well as most websites for domestic violence agencies across the United States, including those that serve South Asian victims like Narika and Maitri, have the ability to hit an escape button, which allows for people to be able to remove the trace of them having access for domestic violence related services. I'm going to turn it over to Lataji for a moment because she wants to call on somebody. Lataji.
Actually, there's a question from Reshma. She says, I think you should read that out. I sent it to you. She says, I'm from Bihar. but I live in California. I've heard from family and friends that farmers and factory owners are sending special air-conditioned buses and giving raises to lure the workers back to Punjab and other states. The Bihar government has no plans to rehabilitate the workers, so they will be forced to go back. Your thoughts on that?
It's very sad and unfortunate, but everything in India gets politicized, and Bihar is currently in the midst of a terrible political quagmire, I would say. Which party does the current prime minister belong to? The current chief minister belongs to. The ex-chief ministers are trying to see this as an opportunity to, really um, bring back their party in power, and then you have the center where another political party is trying to, establish its hold. And that's the unfortunate part, where the poor are suffering because of that. And I think always, the ones who own the capital will take advantage of the poor. But we are trying our best to make sure that there is some rehabilitation plan for the migrant workers. There are some organizations that are trying to do what skill sets are these migrant workers already having, on which they were working in the urban areas. They are excellent diamond cutters, they are excellent weavers, they are excellent machine operators, they have very good mechanical skills, electrical skills. And how could you turn those skills into an asset for these migrant workers? So let us hope that in another week or 10 days we may have a plan for these workers.
Lata ji.
Mm.
Lata
Yeah.
ji, go ahead.
Yeah, I've been, sort of watching this young woman for the last couple of years create something right here locally in Palo Alto. And I wanted to call upon her to talk about a couple of initiatives that she's been working with women. And now I want to call Mary Jane Marcus. Mary Jane, are you there? If you're here, yes, please do comment on, but you have very little time, so you have to be quick.
Okay, thanks, Lata. Yeah, I just appreciate hearing what you're saying. We formed kind of a network of women from around the world called Kafania Peace Collective. And I think what happened during COVID is women here are the first to say, here's what we need, here's what's going on. And so we've tried to lift up people here, and we have two projects. One is a rent fund, especially for undocumented, because unfortunately the moratorium, they're never going to be able to, the indebtedness like you talked about in India, people are facing here, they cannot repay if they've lost work. They're not ever going to be able to repay. So we have a rent fund, and then we have another person who started, and Kala is also part of it, to visit the RVs on El Camino and give gift cards and support. But the last thing I'll say is, I think what means the most to people is knowing that someone cares about them. So I think it means so much, everything that you're doing in India and also here, because I think lifting up what women are seeing as needed and letting people know in this relational, loving way that we're there for them, because we don't quite have a government that supports the most vulnerable, unfortunately, right now. So I can put a link to our project, and you can also reach out to me or Kala if you have questions too, or Lata too. So thanks.
Thank you, Mary Jane. And yes, please share resources. As you also saw, I gave a shout out to Aparna from Nextdoor Solutions. She has provided the 24-hour crisis hotline that Nextdoor Solutions to Domestic Violence operates here in the county of Santa Clara. I would also say that at this point in time, for all of us to be educated about the barriers that survivors have in accessing services is as important as knowing what services are available in our own communities. I will say that all of us have access to information. Rima Ben was talking about it as well. So feel free to educate yourself about what is available in the communities that you come from back in India. And I am a resource. I'm fortunate to have provided services both in India and here in the United States. So please, I would definitely say, look me up. I want to read out a question from Kala Mehta, in fact, Rima Ben, for you. She says, Namaste, Rima ji. Can you speak about health layering upon self-help groups and microfinance interventions in the context of COVID-19? She's also looking forward to seeing you again. So, Rima Ben.
Nice to hear from you, Kalaban, after a long time. Dr. Kalaban, in fact. Sorry, I'm so bad at all those things. But, a very good question that how do you, so one thing that we have been talking about is that, not talking about, but, saying very strongly is that the whole focus has gone on Medicare. When we talk about, COVID-19, it's all about hospitals, hospital equipments and medicines and everything. Nobody thinks of healthcare per se. That, what does a one household or what does a woman need in terms of healthcare? She needs, good quality of nutrition, food, access to food, good quality air, water. All these things have to be thought through, and unless and until we don't think of these things, it will all be Medicare, and then it will be forgotten till there's another crisis, and then we start talking about another set of Medicare facilities that would be need to be created. So just focusing on Medicare, medical infrastructure, and therefore, what we have been working on is that how do you, through the women's self-help groups and through their collectives, how do you encourage women to put aside their own healthcare fund, and using that fund, how can they access better healthcare or better medical services? So we have health entrepreneurs, and these health entrepreneurs have started working on providing health essential packages to all the households, be it in the urban areas or in the rural areas. So not just doing healthcare related messaging and education through posters and video messages and voice messages, but if I am suffering from an NCD and I need to have access to daily medicines, how do I have that access? If I needed to have my blood parameters being and blood indices being checked and all the laboratories are being closed down, how do I do that? So the health entrepreneurs would work on these kind of, through the health fund, then the woman doesn't have to worry, or her household doesn't have to worry, because she can withdraw from her savings from that health fund and she could have access to that. So what we are working is on a holistic healthcare package rather than just immediate Medicare to address the disease. I hope I answered it to your satisfaction.
I will, Kala Ben, do you want to unmute and say a few words, or did you get what you wanted? Yeah, okay. I'll turn it over to Lata Ben. I know you had a question or you were going to call on somebody, please.
Yeah. Well, there was somebody has sent a question on the chat box. She has one question. She says, if you could highlight 3 points of success or failure for women self-help groups. And that would be the last question, please. Remember that? Yeah.
What does that question mean? Success or failure of self-help group? Or a self-help group as an approach, or of the women per se?
So Smarita, I think if you're there, I will ask, let you answer that question. Are you here, Smarita?
Yeah, I saw her a second
yes,
ago.
I am here.
Okay.
Good evening to everyone. Actually, we have seen here. I am from India, and I'm running a social enterprise, and I work for reintegration and rehabilitation for women with extreme sexual violence and human trafficking. So, and we have seen challenges in not setting up, in making a SHG success for these women. So I wanted to know, because you are an expert in this field, so how any 3 points for either why it fails or how it succeeds.
Okay, I now understand it. First of all, I'm not an expert, I'm still a learner, and I learn every day from our members. So, but I think to your question, just forming a self-help group will not help the women in any way. One has to invest and work on a very holistic and an integrated approach to make that self-help group, or to turn that self-help group into a viable organization of the women, and they feel a sense of ownership of that organization. So, you form a self-help group, but I don't know what is my responsibility as a member of the self-help group. How am I going to participate and make that self-help group turn into an opportunity, not just for me, but even for the other women? So I think that therefore, the kind of capacity building, both in terms of leadership capacity as well as managerial capacity, so that I understand my responsibility as a member or as a shareholder of that self-help group. And then I know how do I run this self-help group. Running an organization, we all know that, it's not an easy thing. And therefore, how do I convene a meeting? How do I set the agenda? How do I write the minutes of the meeting? All those things, somebody has to build her capacity, the managerial capabilities. As a leader, what are the qualities of a good leader? Do I just think of myself, or do I put others first and then think of myself? And that's what a self-help group has to be. And that is one of the reasons why you have thousands of self-help groups, but the conditions of the women are not changing as much as they should have, in spite of having so many self-help groups, and in spite of having large programs that support these self-help groups. So I think unless and until we work on a very holistic and an integrated approach, the self-help group doesn't become a tool for the woman to really, address her issues, and a sense of belongingness doesn't come.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much, Rima ji. This is a lot of information to unpack for all of us. And to
At
all
7
of you.
a.m. in the morning.
That's right. Yes, for those of you who joined us from India, even special thank you, because you are at your intelligent best right now, and you're leaving us with so much thought for us to move from thought to action. And I really want to also thank everybody who took the time to join us today, to ICA for giving me the opportunity, as a county employee, but also a member of the Indian diaspora. I see that I feel invaluably indebted to groups like ICA, because you are bridging what we all are hoping to do. And with Rima Ben's tenacity in having empowered 1.9 million women, I am sure that we found solutions that will allow us to ensure that women and girls, as we recover from this pandemic, because recover we will, I promise you, that women and girls are kept at the center. I'm going to now turn it over to Lata Ben.
Before we end, can you give me a minute?
Sure, absolutely, Rima.
Take it away.
I believe that this is the end of the question answers and the talking. So we always end with a song. And I won't sing a full song, but just one verse of that song. So whenever is an appropriate time, you just let me know.
Why don't I finish a couple of things and then we'll get back to you. Please stay on and that. Okay. Now, I tell you, I want to quickly move through this because I have another person to invite to say a few things. Anyway, this has been an absolutely amazing session, Rima Ben. Thank you for your brilliant insights into the current status of the most vulnerable group of women. Okay, the solutions Eva is applying and a bit about what the future holds. And I especially loved the uplifting stories about people like Shanta Ben, okay, and other women who have been so resilient and creative. And that was the most heartening things for all of us to sort of hear. And also about your post-pandemic thoughts, you know, how can we recover from all of these things? So thank you so much for agreeing to be our guest and giving us all of these insights into that. And Pratima, thank you for your exceptional job of moderating and presenting the local scenario here and the help and support being created in the county level. I'm sure there'll be a lot of applause for both of you. Heartfelt thanks to the many NGO representatives who joined us from NGO from India at this very early hour. And for me, it's all of you who are the real heroines right now. You know, this discussion once again shows us that these issues don't exist in a vacuum, but rather on an intersection of multiple issues. We heard, exchanged, and learned so much today from our grassroots partners and friends. The speakers as well as the audience have been inspirational. And together, you have offered us a glimpse into the multiple avenues available for all of us for social change, you know, showing us that a more equitable world is possible, okay, which is deeply inspiring. Maybe even incorporate some of those into our own lives to help shape it, okay. I invite our audience to decide on the action that touch your heart, one that will help you make it through these challenging times. Stay safe in the pursuit of rebuilding a world where all can thrive, okay? Please provide your feedback to the survey you'll be getting in your mailbox, and stay tuned for our next virtual meeting on education, and that would be on July 20th, yes, same time. And I want to thank all my ICA colleagues, especially Deepa and Sharmila and Govind and Bhupen and everybody else. And now I invite Reshma Nigam, ICA president, to say the few last thoughts. Reshma?
Thank you very much. I'm Reshma Nigam. I'm the current president of ICA, and it is my extreme privilege and honor to address you all today. I am so humbled. I have really nothing to add. You've heard from the top thinkers and doers of today in India and in the US, and you've realized how women are being impacted. Lata, congratulations to you for putting yet another outstanding webinar. There is a lesson in here for us, the fact that out of the 50 people, there are only 7 men, and most of us are women discussing our own issues. So we need to somehow get the dialogue with the men going. I think that is very, very important, and let's hope that they come for other issues also. I would like to thank Rima Ben from the bottom of my heart for what she's doing for women and girls in India, and it looks like even for the men. Pratima, thank you so much for being such an outstanding moderator, and for all the work that you do and the help that you give ICA and to Lata. It's very inspirational to listen to all of you. And before I go, I want to do a deep namaste to all of you for being here. And the whole point of this webinar is to continue the dialogue, and the dialogue is not necessarily with ICA, but within your communities, your families. So please continue to do that. Make a wish for yourself that you'll do something outside your daily life, and that would make us more happy than you coming to our webinars. But I hope you do continue coming. Thank you very much. Namaste.
Thank you all. Thank you. I think now it's time to close this. And I know it always feels so short, but thank you again. Thank you, Rima Ben. Thank you, Reshma. Thank you, Pratima. And thank you to all our audience and participants who were here today. Thank you, and good night. And good night.
Thank you so much, and I really want to thank you, Lata Ben, to ICA's executive committee, to Protima Ben, Deepa Ben, Govind Bhai. I also learned that how do you set your seating arrangement so that, you know, virtually you are also visible, and how do you sit under the light or in front of the light. So I am also learning, and or I could have sat outside, but you know, mosquitoes bother us a lot. But I would just end as we always do at Seva, and this is what gives us the hope and the strength to continue. And I don't know whether I sing it in Gujarati or Hindi, but I'll try to sing it in Hindi so that most of you would follow what I'm singing. And if you all know, maybe you could join me as well. हम होंगे कामयाब, हम होंगे कामयाब, हम होंगे कामयाब, एक दिन। ओ मन
में है विश्वास, पूरा है विश्वास, हम होंगे कामयाब एक दिन।
Thank you. I really appreciate